Hi, Leanne Donoghue-Tamplin here. Today I'm interviewing Felicity Cook. Felicity is a survivor of domestic violence, and she recently had her face put up on the side of a building in the Sydney CBD as a representative of the new face of domestic violence. She's a passionate advocate for survivors and runs her own social movement campaign called Onward and Upward, about helping women after they've escaped domestic violence continue to work towards their goals. She's also a really creative person and has her own cake decorating business. This is the first half of my interview with Felicity. The second half will be in a following podcast. Hope you enjoy the interview, and I'll talk to you again soon. All right, thanks for joining us today, Felicity. Can I just ask you, you may have overcome quite a few other obstacles in your life prior to this, but can you explain to me a bit about the experience you had overcoming domestic violence? What was that like for you?
My experience with domestic violence basically shaped my adult life. I was 19 when I met this man, and I spent nearly 3 years within the relationship, plus the number of years afterwards that it took to sort of shake him. And he's one of those people, which happens a lot, he's one of those people who he's never completely gone. He likes to pop up every now and then.
I like how you said to shake him. I like that too.
They're very hard to shake. And I think that's probably, that's a big issue when it comes to domestic violence. You can't just walk away and that's it. It was a horrible time in life. It was a very, very black time. I suffered physical violence. I suffered emotional, social, verbal, financial, basically anything and everything under the sun sort of violence at his hands. I witnessed animal cruelty at his hands. It shaped my adult life. I mean, I don't know who I would be having if I hadn't gone through what I went through with him. It sort of started me down a path of, just life, I guess, because I left home. I was quite naive. I left home for the first time to be with him, and it's the journey post that. I mean, I went through I think it was the aftermath. It was a horrible time, but it was the aftermath which has kind of affected me the most. I went through down a path of self-destruction for a number of years after that, and it took a long time to, come to terms with who I was or who I am, sorry, and what was going on and what had happened, and find myself sort of after that. It was, as most people who go through domestic violence, would say, it was a very private thing. It was, I never talked about it. I never sort of explained what was happening. It has been more than 10 years since that's happened. And even now, people close to me don't really know any details. I've not really talked about it until I've started to publicly speak and share my story. Even, my family and my closest friends, and even my husband now, he says to me, he goes, I don't really know what sort of happened because I never really talked about it. So as it definitely shaped me.
Was there a toughest point for you?
When I was in it, or since then?
Doesn't matter. Any of that block of time of both the period you were with him and the period afterwards that you were kind of dealing with it yourself?
Yeah, I think that I'd say, the experience itself obviously has left its marks, and there are some trauma memories which will probably never go away. But for me, I think the worst time was I hit rock bottom 2, maybe 3 years later. I found myself in a situation that I don't know how I got into it, and I didn't know how to get out of it. And I basically realised in that moment that I was absolutely disrespecting and disregarding myself as a human being. And I had allowed myself to get to this place where I was had let myself be worthless, and it was a turning point for me, and I realised that I'd gone too far and I had to turn around. So it was a very, very dark time for me, and it started a very slow journey of going, you have to look after yourself and you have to find a way through this. You can't keep letting what's happened control you and control what your life is. because you're now making decisions. No one else is making those decisions for you. So it was a very dark time. It's something that the incident itself is something that I don't talk about because I don't think it needs to be talked about.
Sure.
It's a memory that I have, and it's one of those things that, you know, if I ever needed to look back at it and know that I'm really not in that place anymore, that I've come a long way from there.
Sounds like it was a big turning point, though.
It was. I'd reached a point. I was a mess. Like there was nothing left, and I destroyed relationships, and I was a horrible person at that point. I was like I can stand up and say that I was not a very nice person at the time, and I let myself just reach a point where just nothing. I had no respect for myself, and that's what I, let it become after someone else had disrespected me. I just sort of continued. I had continued his work, I guess.
Well, I think he just did a really good job of training you into thinking that way. Absolutely. If I can ask you as well, having been through what you've been through, how do you now define success? What do you see that as? Success
for me is has a lot to do with my own awareness of my own worth. So it's and it's something that, and for a long time, I said I didn't deal with what had happened. I never really faced it, never really talked about it. It's actually only been recently. It's actually only been this year, and it's been more than 10 years since I started. Since that happened, it's only been since sort of mid to late this year that I've started to see a counsellor and talk about things and work through some of the things that have been I've been holding on to because. A lot of what I'm holding on to is not necessarily the events that happened back then, but because of that, how I have then defined my life since then, and how I have judged myself and seen myself and rated my own self-worth and things like that. So success for me personally is when it has nothing to do with what other people think. I don't know if that makes sense, but I have spent the last 10 years trying to gain approval from people, and often people who in places that are bad places, whether they're whether it was continuing the cycle of men who are similar to that man who disrespected me so badly, to just people on the street or people in here, there and everywhere, trying to be what I think people want me to be. So for me personally, in my own life, success is being okay with me. It is achieving what I believe I'm here to achieve, and in turn giving back to other people so that they can understand what I've learned, and hopefully that will help to shape other people. Because I have achieved a lot. I've built a business. I've come through a lot. I have a lot of life experience in terms of many things that I have gone through. But I've built a successful business. I've won awards. I've learned how to take a passion and turn it into something, and shape that from a place where I was, obviously in a very bad space, and it was very dark and very and all that sort of thing. And it's something that it's the strength and the commitment to myself that I hope to then pass on to my own children and to anyone else who is open and willing and to learn from me. To me, that is success, that I can have taken a bad experience and found the lesson in it and found the power in it, and I've turned that over and I've taken that power back. And if I can help just one other person learn to grab hold of their own power and use it, then that to me is success.
So what strategies have you used to get yourself to that point? Both, whether that be within the relationship or that period afterwards. What have you used to try and keep moving forward, including that time which I would call recovery, like after that turning point? What have you been doing? Do you want me to give you some examples, or are you okay? Yeah.
Look, for a long time I did nothing. As I said, I just kind of walked away and just went, I just keep going. I didn't really address it. I just kind of kept going. When I hit that sort of really low point, it was shortly after that I met a man who became like a mentor for me, and I did a lot of healing work with him. He was very much into sort of a spiritual side, and I did a lot of work with him, and we did a lot of sessions and a lot of he introduced me to a lot of sort of techniques, and so I used a lot of
things like meditation.
Meditation. So we used I don't know if you've ever heard of things like the Sedona Method or paraliminals, or they're kind of like a meditation. I don't know how to really describe them. They're kind of meditation-y kind of. They're like techniques where like the Sedona Method is a method where you learn to, but in simplest terms, let go of things and not be attached to wanting or needing things and stuff like that. It's letting go of that hold, and allowing things to be the way they are. Paraliminals are there's a whole range of paraliminals, and they're like a session that you listen to, and they do like I'm really technical with my explanation, but they it's all words, and it's all works in the sort of the back part of your brain. It's not something that you have to focus on or follow or listen to. You allow your brain to, and they put little messages in your head.
Subconscious stuff.
And I really don't know how to describe it. I'll just look it up and tell you. So I did lots of those sorts of things, but we just did a lot of also just a lot of healing work. I was in a lot of pain. And he gave me an open space to be in that pain. He gave me an open space without judgment, to explain what I was feeling, what was happening, what was going on. Because I think the judgment was a big issue. I faced judgment from my family. I faced judgment from friends. I faced judgment from society, because as we are talking about, almost 10 years ago, domestic violence was not as big of a deal or as public as it is now. So it was, and as being someone who was in it and not in the right frame of mind, it's not like I was able to just go, hey, you know what, this is something I've experienced, can someone help me? I was a mess. So it was very difficult to approach anything without being judged, because people didn't know what was going on. And I'm not saying that my family were, I'm not putting any blame on them. They didn't understand what was happening. All they saw was I was a mess, and I was an unpleasant person, that sort of thing. So he gave me space to, without judgment, to sort of work through a lot of things. So, because I'm very much, I need to kind of vent things out to talk, to get, move on through things. So I did that for a couple of years. I sort of worked with him, and the other thing I did do was and he helped me through this a lot, was that I came to a place of forgiveness. And actually quite recently I gave a speech about my experience for White Ribbon Day, and someone came up to me afterwards and he said to me, you talked about forgiveness. He said, and you mentioned it twice, about how, you've come to a place of forgiveness and that you've forgiven what's happened. And he said to me, he said, in all my years of and he was a pastor, a minister or something for a church. And he said, I've heard, survivors speak, and I've spoken to survivors, and I've worked with survivors. He said, I've never heard anyone talk about reaching a place of forgiveness, which is obviously what, the church sort of works towards. And he said, why do you talk about that? He said, you mentioned it more than once. And I said, because I had to come to a place of forgiveness so that I could move on with my life. There was a lot of soul searching involved in coming to that. And the way I kind of look at it is, I forgive myself for what I went through. I'm not holding myself, saying, well, this is your fault. I forgive myself, this is something that you went through, and that's okay. I forgive what happened to me. I don't forgive him for what he did. I don't ever want to see him, but I forgive what has happened to me, and I accept an apology that I know I will never get. And that took a long time to come to that place, a very, very, very long time. It's not something you just go, well, okay, I forgive him. Yeah. But I know I will never get an apology for what's happened. But as long as I'm holding out for an apology, I'm never free of it. I'm never free of what I went through. I'm never free of that man. So
I think there's a misunderstanding about forgiveness, and I think a lot of people think the term relates to forgiving the person, the other person, when it's really about you. It's really about you giving you something so that you can move past it, isn't it?
That's right. And that's what I sort of said, as I said, I don't forgive him. I don't ever want to see him again. Like, it's not like I say, okay, well, it's all right, he did it, but it's okay. Maybe we can go and be friends. Or like, it's nothing. I don't ever want to see him again. I don't forgive him. I have a regret that he was never, formally held accountable for what he did. But I do forgive what has happened to me, because it happened to me. It was an experience in my life, and I forgive that it's no longer in control of me. And no, I won't get an apology, but I accept that for myself, there's a sorry, like I'm sorry to myself, I guess, is almost what it is.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing that I did, part of my healing, which was something that I did for myself, was that I abstained from relationships for, I think it was nearly 3 years. And I mean, of all form. I didn't go into a relationship. I didn't have any sort of sexual relationships, nothing at all. I stayed away completely. I had to give myself time to heal, because, my physical and my spiritual body had been very, very badly damaged. And the more I continued to try and find solace in someone else or in physical comfort with someone, the more I kept finding myself going down that track, of just where I was just, allowing myself to be just whatever. So I stopped all forms of intimate connection with the opposite sex, and for about sort of 3 years, and I was very good with that. Like, I let it be. I let my physical body heal. I let my spiritual self heal. And by the time I came out of that, I also noticed that the next sort of relationship that I went into, again, wasn't a perfect relationship, but it was already a step up from the cycle of relationships I'd been in before I had taken that time to let go of that and to heal and to forgive and all that sort of thing. So I had found myself in this repeating cycle of just bad men, I guess they were, without sort of putting a label on all men, because not all men are bad, but this sort of man that I had been with, I sort of kept finding myself attracted to and getting, looped in with people who were very similar and who in the long run were not going to serve me well. So I did find after I came out of that I, the next relationship I went into was sort of the next step up. He was, he was a kind man. It didn't work out. He had his own issues and that sort of thing. But again, I learned from that. And every time, I encountered a new person in my life, I was learning again, because I was discovering who I was attracting to me. And I think there's a lot in that. If you look at the people who are in your life, and the types of people that they are, the way they live their lives, their ideals and their morals and their dreams and goals and all those sorts of things, it's no reflection on who they are, because people are who they are. But I do see it as a reflection on who you are and where you're at in your life. And if you're finding that people around you are angry people who are angry or are maybe don't have controlling or don't have many goals for where they want to go, or things like that, you have to look at how that's reflecting on you, because you're obviously attracting something to you, which means there's something unresolved that you need to look at. So I found that to be quite powerful in starting to learn myself and starting to trust my own instincts and my own my heart again, because for a long time I didn't. And I'm a very strong person. I'm a very strong, opinionated, stubborn person. Mother will tell you that. Some people she's never met in her life. From day dot, that's kind of, even coming out of her, I was stubborn as hell. So I had to learn to trust myself again. And again, I had to learn to quieten my mind and quieten my body and allow myself to go, you know what, I think the little hand going, hello, I'm in here, actually has something to say.
Do you know, I find that when people experience any kind of trauma in a kind of chronic way, so it's over a couple of years, whether it be in your childhood or in adulthood, that gut feeling gets really rattled. You know, you have one that automatically says, this doesn't feel right, but you've got someone who's doing something that doesn't feel right and saying, no, it's fine. No, this is okay. You know, no, I love you in this context. You know, so it kind of confuses that message that you get from your gut. So like you say, you can't trust that gut feeling. It's not steering you in the right directions because it's just out of whack.
Yeah, absolutely.
Confused.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, you mentioned there about your stubbornness. So I want to ask you about the character strengths that got you through that. I'm going to read you a bit of a list and you may identify some of them. There's a lot more than what I'm going to read you. So things like good judgment, creativity. I know you talk a lot about that in your media stuff that I see. Courage and perseverance, teamwork, self-discipline, kindness, connections to others, and spirituality. Any of those kinds of things that you felt you drew on the most? I think determination is probably another way of talking about stubbornness.
Yeah, it depends on the context. Sometimes I'm really stubborn and sometimes I'm just determined. It depends on whether or not I want to, share, food with my husband. Being stubborn. Obviously creativity is a big one for me. But even my creativity, it took me a number of years before I sort of found that again. Because as I said, I was very rattled. My whole internal sort of self was very rattled. So it took a few years before I found that again. I definitely say like spirituality, that was one that I came across. I think there's a difference between spirituality and religion. Yeah. People, if you talk about spirituality, the religion, it's not. It is two very, very different things. Spirituality in terms of listening to yourself and listening to, allowing the world to be what it is and kind of being a part of, this whole kind of cog and all that kind of thing. So spirituality became a big thing for me. It's something I don't use so much anymore, but it was a very big thing when I was healing. Yeah. You said something else about, I think you said something about like connecting to people. Connections with others. Connections with others is a big thing for me because I've always been like, this is like even since childhood, I've always been, I'm someone who, I'm sort of, in this sense, I'm actually like the complete opposite of my husband. So my husband knows everybody, everywhere, is friends with everyone. We cannot go, we can go to another country and he'll bump into somebody that he knows. Like at our wedding, we had a battle about the fact that he wanted to invite like hundreds of people. I don't understand how much it's going to cost to feed all these people. You have to keep your list short. Whereas for me, I've always been someone who, like, I can count my closest friends on one hand. Yeah. But I take that very seriously, and I respect that greatly because the connections that I have with them are real. Mm-hmm. I don't do well with just being friends with superficial stuff. Yeah. I need to have a connection. I need to understand someone. I need to know that they understand me. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I've struggled with a lot. I struggled in school because I didn't have those sort of connections with people. Like I really only came out of school with one, like my oldest girlfriend who I've known since the first day of kindergarten. So what's that, 26 years old? 25 years, something like that. A long time. Yeah. She has been there through everything. She was there through my darkest days. She was always there. She was the one who helped me to leave and things like that. So connections with people are something that I take very seriously and that I hold very close to my heart. So that's a very important part of how I got through a lot, because I needed support from people who I actually felt like I could just let go and be vulnerable. And it's very hard to be vulnerable when the last time you were vulnerable, someone took very bad advantage of that. So it's very hard to be vulnerable. And it is something that I struggle with today. I struggle to be vulnerable, even with people that I know closely, or even through business. I struggle to be vulnerable in front of my clients. Sometimes I'll struggle to be vulnerable in front of my husband. But again, I'm learning all that all the time about how the difference between a safe vulnerable and an unsafe vulnerable, and they're two very different things. Yeah.
What about, you mentioned the strength, you mentioned leaving. She helped you leave. Yeah. What about the strength it took for you to get out of that? Do you see that as a character trait of yours to have that
Oh,
strength?
definitely. Yes, definitely. Like, I think if you talk to, you know, people who know me, they would say that strength is definitely a big character. I was trying to remember your list, actually. But
Yeah, I know. It's a lovely list. All right, we're going to stop the interview there for a moment and just do a bit of a review. In this part, first half of the interview, Felicity has explained that she defines success by being fully herself. It isn't about trying to please others. She's learned that it's not about monetary gains, although those things are important, but it's much more about just expressing herself and not trying to make sure everybody else is happy. She also finds success in helping others own their own power, find and own their own power. Some of the strategies she used, although she actually said she didn't really use any strategies, the things she described are absolutely things that I've heard other women talk about in terms of overcoming their own obstacles. So she talked about a mindfulness or a meditation type practice. She said she used subliminal messaging, which for some people is about positive self-talk. For others, it's about more of a subconscious process. She also said something that was really important, was that she found an open space where she could share what was going on for her without judgment. She learned to forgive herself. She said she also learned to forgive what had happened to her, and she was able to let go of the need to ever get an apology from the perpetrator. She also said that one of the strategies she used was that she abstained from relationships for 3 years. Given the challenge for Felicity was overcoming a really difficult relationship, this makes a lot of sense that she was able to keep away from repeating the same behaviours in a relationship or finding the same people to be in a relationship with, and give herself some time to heal. She also felt that eventually she was able to reach out for help. But she took a long time to do that because she felt so judged. So she really had to overcome that feeling of being judged to get to a place to be able to reach out for help. Some of the strengths she identified was, well, she called it stubbornness, but I think it's determination. I think she mentioned it depended on the context. She also said that spirituality played a big role in her being able to push through this and overcome this. She also said she had to relearn to trust herself, and that was a really big strength of hers. She had a lot of really good connections to others. In fact, it was those connections to others that helped her escape. And then she just talked briefly about some inner strength that she has and how that was able to help her escape. All right, hope you found that interview with Felicity so far really helpful, and the rest of the interview is on the following podcast. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.